Hello everyone, welcome back. Well, we all knows betrayal cuts deeper than a knife, but sometimes, karma has a way of setting things right. I never imagined that the woman I loved, the one I vowed to spend my life with, would be the source of my greatest pain. We had what seemed like the perfect marriage, at least, that's what I thought. We weren't the kind of couple who fought over little things. We laughed together, made plans for the future, and built a life side by side. Or so I believed. It wasn't until small things started to change that I realized something was off. At first, I ignored them. Maybe I was overthinking, maybe I was just being paranoid. But the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. It started with the late nights at work, unexpected, unannounced, and far too frequent. She always had an excuse. Meetings ran late, a project deadline was coming up, her boss needed something urgent. I wanted to trust her. I had no reason not to. Then came the phone habits. She used to leave her phone lying around without a second thought, but now, it was always glued to her side. If I walked into the room, she would quickly lock the screen. If it buzzed, she would tilt it away from me before checking. She even started sleeping with it under her pillow. When I asked, she laughed it off, saying she was just more cautious because of work. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the real shift? The way she treated me. There was a time when she would greet me at the door with a warm smile, a kiss, maybe a little teasing about my day. But now, there was distance. Conversations became shorter, her patience thinner. She would pick fights over the smallest things, things that never used to bother her before. My way of folding laundry, the way I loaded the dishwasher, even the way I breathed. It was like I had suddenly become an inconvenience in my own home. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't doing enough. Maybe I was slipping as a husband, failing to meet her needs. I tried harder. I cooked dinner more often, planned date nights, left little notes in her bag like I used to when we were newlyweds. But nothing changed. If anything, she pulled away even more. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just wasn't ready to face the truth yet. But I had no idea that the cracks in my marriage were just the beginning, and that karma was already on its way, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It started subtly, almost unnoticeably at first. Little things that, on their own, wouldn't mean much. A late night here, a vague excuse there. But when those little things started adding up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had never been the type to stay late at work before. In fact, she used to complain about people who lived in their offices, saying life was too short to waste it under fluorescent lights. But suddenly, she was the one working overtime, constantly. At first, I didn't question it. She had always been ambitious, and if a project demanded extra effort, I was willing to be supportive. But then came the inconsistencies. One night, she texted me saying she'd be home late because of a last-minute meeting. It wasn't unusual, at least, not anymore. I sighed, ordered some takeout, and settled in for a quiet night. But as I was scrolling through social media, something caught my eye. One of her colleagues had posted a story from a bar across town, celebrating the end of a long day with drinks. And there she was, in the background, laughing. No meeting. No urgent project. Just a night out that she had chosen to lie about. I confronted her when she got home, but she barely flinched. It was just a quick drink after work, she said, brushing past me. I didn't think it was a big deal. Her nonchalant attitude threw me off. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was just being insecure. But then there was the phone. She used to leave it on the kitchen counter, unattended, without a care in the world. But now, it was always in her pocket, clutched in her hand, or face down on the table. and she never let me near it. If it rang and I so much as glanced in its direction, she would snatch it up like I was about to steal government secrets. One night, she was in the shower when it buzzed. Out of pure reflex, I glanced at the screen. No name, just a number. But what made my stomach twist was the message preview: "Miss you already. Can't wait to see you again." My heart pounded. I stared at the screen, debating whether to unlock it, whether to dig deeper. But just as my fingers hovered over it, the phone went dark. I could have confronted her right then. I could have demanded answers. But instead, I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was just a friend. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe I was just seeing things. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You give them the benefit of the doubt, even when the truth is staring you right in the face. But it didn't stop there. She started picking fights over the pettiest things. My cooking was too bland. The way I folded the laundry was wrong. I left my shoes too close to the door. At first, I thought she was just stressed. Maybe work was getting to her. But it was more than that. There was a new edge to her words, a kind of irritation that hadn't been there before. And worst of all, it felt like she was trying to push me away. One night, as we sat in silence over dinner, I finally asked, "Is something wrong?" She barely looked up from her plate. "I don't know what you mean. You've been different lately. Distant." She let out a sigh, exasperated, like my concern was nothing more than an inconvenience. "I'm just tired, okay? Work has been crazy." And that was the end of the conversation. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Because the alternative? It was too painful to even consider. So I told myself I was imagining things. I convinced myself that she was just under a lot of pressure. That all marriages went through phases like this. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered the truth. This wasn't just stress. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was the beginning of the end. It wasn't long before my growing suspicion turned into something much worse. Doubt had already settled in my mind, gnawing at me every time she stayed out late, every time she pulled away from me. But I still held on to the hope that I was wrong. I wanted to be wrong. Because if I wasn't, it meant my marriage, the life I had built with this woman, was crumbling right in front of me. Then, one afternoon, a friend shattered that illusion. I was at work when I got a text. "Hey man, I don't know how to say this, but I just saw your wife at a cafe with some guy. And it didn't look like a business meeting." My stomach dropped. I stared at the message, my hands tightening around my phone. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was just a colleague. Maybe my friend was mistaken. But deep down, I knew better. I forced myself to reply, "Are you sure?" A minute later, a photo came through. Blurry, taken from a distance, but clear enough to make my blood run cold. She was sitting across from a man, leaning in close. Their hands touched across the table, fingers intertwined in a way that was far too intimate to be innocent. Her expression, soft, smiling, eyes locked onto his, was one I hadn't seen in months. My chest tightened as I stared at the image. There was no mistaking what this was. I felt a rush of emotions, anger, betrayal, humiliation. But more than anything, I felt numb. Like my mind was struggling to process the truth that had been in front of me all along. I knew I needed more than a single photo. I needed proof. Solid, undeniable evidence. That night, after she fell asleep, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her phone. My hands trembled as I carefully lifted it from the nightstand, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid it would wake her. She had changed her password weeks ago, another red flag I had ignored. But I had spent years by her side. I knew her habits, the numbers she used. And after a few tries, the screen unlocked. What I found made me sick. A flood of messages. Long, late-night conversations. Flirty texts. Heart emojis. Explicit messages that made my stomach churn. In his name, Daniel. I scrolled, unable to stop myself, reading their exchanges. I can't wait to see you again. Tonight was amazing. I wish I could wake up next to you. He suspects nothing. I feel bad, but I can't stop. I gritted my teeth, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. He suspects nothing. She knew exactly what she was doing. And she had no remorse. For a moment, I thought about waking her up, shoving the phone in her face, demanding answers. But something inside me held back. If she had been lying so effortlessly all this time, she would just find another excuse. Another way to twist things around. No. If I was going to confront her, I needed to do it right. So instead, I put the phone back where I found it, laid down beside her, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep never came that night. Because now, I knew the truth. And I was done pretending. The morning she left for her so-called business trip, I already knew the truth. But I played along, pretending to believe her lies, waiting for the perfect moment to confirm what I had suspected all along. She had mentioned the trip casually over dinner a few nights ago. I have to go out of town this weekend, she said, barely looking up from her plate. Some company retreat thing. I won't be back until Sunday night. I had forced myself to nod, acting as though it didn't bother me. But inside, something twisted in my gut. She had never mentioned a retreat before. And considering how distant she had been lately, this sudden trip seemed far too convenient. Then came the preparations. She packed carefully, too carefully. Normally, she would throw a few things into a bag and be done with it, but this time, she planned every outfit. She spent extra time picking her best dresses, the ones she used to wear on special date nights. She even set aside lingerie I hadn't seen in months. I watched from the doorway as she zipped up her suitcase, a bright, almost excited energy about her. The kind of excitement that should have been reserved for me, for us. Are you sure this is just work? I asked, keeping my voice light. She rolled her eyes. Of course. It's just a boring networking event. Trust me, I'd rather be home. But her face betrayed her words. There was no frustration, no reluctance, just anticipation. She wasn't dreading this trip. She was looking forward to it. That was when I made my decision. I was going to follow her. I waited until she was out the door, rolling her suitcase down the driveway, before I grabbed my keys and got into my car. I kept a safe distance, watching as she made her way toward the highway. She drove for nearly 2 hours before pulling into a hotel parking lot, not a corporate retreat venue, but a quiet, intimate hotel on the outskirts of another city. And then I saw him. Daniel. The same man from the cafe. The one she had been texting late at night. He was already waiting for her in the parking lot, leaning casually against his car. The moment she stepped out, he pulled her into a tight embrace. She melted into him, resting her head against his chest like he was the love of her life. Like I never existed. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, every muscle in my body screaming for me to get out of the car, to march over there and expose her for the liar she was. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed to be smart. I needed to let this play out so I could end this on my terms. I pulled out my phone and took a few photos. Then I watched as they walked inside together, hand in hand, disappearing through the hotel doors. She wasn't away on business. She was away with him. And now, she had no idea that I knew. I waited until she got home to confront her. She walked in Sunday night, suitcase in hand, looking refreshed. Relaxed. Like she had just returned from a weekend getaway, not a work retreat. There was a lightness in her step, a glow in her face, a stark contrast to the cold distance she had been showing me for weeks. I stood in the living room, arms crossed, watching as she set down her bag. "How was the trip?" I asked casually. She stretched, sighing. "Exhausting. So many meetings, so much networking. I just want to shower and sleep." I studied her carefully. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't avoiding my gaze. She had gotten so good at lying that it came naturally now. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to one of the photos I had taken, the one of her and Daniel embracing in the parking lot. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned the screen toward her. "What's this?" For the first time, I saw hesitation flicker across her face. A split second of shock, of fear. But then, just as quickly, she masked it, rolling her eyes like I had just asked the dumbest question in the world. "Are you seriously spying on me?" she scoffed, crossing her arms. "That's creepy." I clenched my jaw. "That's not an answer." "Who is he?" She let out a sharp laugh. "Oh my God, you think I'm cheating? That's hilarious." I took a step closer. "I followed you. I saw you meet him. I saw you walk into that hotel together. Don't lie to me." Her expression hardened, and just like that, she flipped the script. "This is what it's come to," she snapped. "You're so insecure that you have to stalk me? You don't trust me at all, do you?" My stomach churned. "Don't turn this around on me. Just tell me the truth." She scoffed again, shaking her head like I was the unreasonable one. "You're being paranoid. He's just a friend. We met up for drinks because I needed to vent about work. That's it." I let out a bitter laugh. "A friend? You hugged him like you couldn't live without him. You checked into a hotel together." She threw her hands up. "Wow, so now I can't even have male friends? Do you hear yourself? This is insane." I felt my grip on reality slipping. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't panicking. She was calm, acting as if I was the one creating a problem out of nothing. "I saw the messages," I said, my voice quieter now. "The late-night texts. Miss you already. Can't wait to see you again." "Explain that." She narrowed her eyes. "So now you're invading my privacy too? I can't believe this. You're digging through my phone, following me around. This is obsessive." I clenched my fists. She hadn't denied sending the messages. She hadn't even bothered to come up with a fake excuse. She was just shifting the blame onto me, making me feel like the bad guy. "You're deflecting," I said, my voice colder now. "Just admit it." She sighed dramatically, rubbing her temples like she was exhausted. "You know what? I'm done with this conversation. I don't have to explain myself when you're acting crazy." And with that, she turned and walked away. I stood there, fists clenched, my mind spinning. She had turned everything around so effortlessly, twisting reality until I started to doubt myself. Was I being paranoid? Was I overreacting? But deep down, I knew the truth. I had seen it with my own eyes. I just wasn't sure what to do next. It happened late one night, long after she had gone to bed. I was sitting alone in the dark, staring blankly at the TV, my mind still reeling from our confrontation. No matter how much I tried to reason with her, she had made me the villain. She had made me feel like I was losing my mind. But I wasn't. I knew what I saw. I knew what I had read. And then, as if the universe had decided I needed one final push, my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was just another spam notification, but when I glanced at the screen, my stomach tightened. It was an unknown number. No name. No context. Just a single message. She's not who you think she is. Check her work emails. My pulse quickened. My fingers hovered over the screen, debating whether to reply, but something told me I wouldn't get an answer. Whoever this was, they didn't want to be known. They just wanted me to see the truth. I glanced toward the bedroom, listening for any movement. Nothing. She was asleep. Slowly, I stood up and walked over to her home office. Her laptop sat on the desk, the lid shut, as if it were taunting me. She had always been protective of it, never letting me near it, always closing tabs the second I walked into the room. Now I knew why. My hands trembled as I lifted the screen. The login page appeared, asking for her password. I exhaled sharply. I could walk away. I could pretend I never got that message. Or I could face the truth. I tried the usual passwords, our anniversary, her childhood pet's name. Nothing. Then I remembered something, Daniel. I typed in his name, followed by a few numbers, and just like that, I was in. My breath hitched as the desktop loaded. Her inbox was open. And there it was. Hundreds of emails. Some of them short, some of them long, but all of them from him. I clicked the first one my eyes landed on. I can't wait to see you again. I hate sneaking around, but it'll be worth it soon. Just be patient. I swallowed hard and clicked another. Has he noticed yet? You deserve better than this. Just say the word, and we'll start our life together. My fingers clenched into fists. Each email felt like a dagger to the chest, but nothing prepared me for the final blow. An email from her. I've been thinking about what you said. You're right, he's holding me back. I just need a little more time to figure things out. I'll tell him soon. I felt the air leave my lungs. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was planning a life without me. I scrolled further, my vision blurring with anger. Discussions about moving in together. About finances. About divorce. He'll never see it coming. He still thinks we're just going through a rough patch. Poor guy. Poor guy. I gritted my teeth, my jaw tightening so hard it hurt. All this time, she had been playing me for a fool. She had let me believe I was the problem. That I was paranoid. That I was insecure. But now I had proof. I closed the laptop and sat there in silence, my heart pounding in my chest. The woman I had built a life with, the woman I had trusted more than anyone else in this world, had already erased me from her future. And she had no idea that I knew. I barely slept that night. The words from her emails played on a loop in my mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. She had already decided to leave me, she was just waiting for the right moment to drop the axe. But she had no idea that I had beaten her to it. By morning, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to ask. I wasn't going to accuse. I was going to give her the chance to tell me the truth. She walked into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. I was already there, sitting at the table, sipping my coffee like it was just another normal day. She barely glanced at me. Morning. I watched her as she poured herself a cup, as if she weren't hiding the biggest betrayal of my life. I set my mug down carefully. I know about him. She froze, the coffee pot still in her hand. Then, slowly, she turned to me. What? I know everything, I said, my voice eerily calm. Daniel. The hotel. The emails. The plans you made behind my back. For the first time in months, I saw real emotion on her face, shock, panic, maybe even guilt. But it didn't last long. She recovered quickly, setting the coffee pot down with a loud clink. "So what? You've been spying on me?" I let out a bitter laugh. "That's what you're focusing on. Not the fact that you've been sneaking around, lying to my face, planning to leave me while pretending everything was fine?" She scoffed. "Oh, don't act so innocent. We haven't been fine for a long time, and you know it." I clenched my fists under the table. "So instead of talking to me, you decided to have an affair? You decided to replace me?" She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "Oh, please. Don't be so dramatic. People fall out of love. It happens." My chest tightened, but I kept my face neutral. "And that's it? That's your excuse?" She shrugged. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? That I regret it?" She let out a short, humorless laugh. "I don't." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. I had spent so long holding on to hope, thinking maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth saving. But now, looking at her, so cold, so indifferent, it finally sank in. The woman I had loved was gone. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dripping with venom. "Let's be real, you could never satisfy me like he does." My grip tightened around the edge of the table, but I didn't react. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. She smirked, like she thought she had one. Then, as if the cruelty wasn't enough, she added, "And don't even think about leaving me. You know what will happen." I narrowed my eyes. "What are you talking about?" Her expression turned smug. "If you try to divorce me, I'll take everything. The house. The savings. And trust me, I'll make sure you come out of this looking like the bad guy." A cold chill ran through me. She had it all planned out. She had been waiting for this moment, waiting to twist the knife even deeper. But she had underestimated me. I stood up, keeping my voice steady. "You think you've won, don't you?" She smirked. "Oh, I know I have." I looked her straight in the eyes and smiled. "Let's see about that." I refused to let her see me break. That morning, after her cruel words, I walked away without another word. No shouting, no pleading. Just silence. And that silence unsettled her more than any argument ever could. She expected a fight. She expected tears. Instead, I gave her nothing. But inside, I was already making my move. That same afternoon, while she was out, I sat down with everything I had gathered, the emails, the text logs, the photos, even financial records. She had been careless, leaving behind just enough breadcrumbs to bury herself. I knew what I had to do. I booked an appointment with the best divorce lawyer I could find. A professional who specialized in cases exactly like this, where one spouse thought they could walk away unscathed. The meeting was straightforward. I laid everything out, and my lawyer's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Well," she said, flipping through the stack of evidence, "your wife made a critical mistake." I leaned forward. "Which is?" She got sloppy. She tapped one of the emails where my wife discussed moving in with Daniel, even mentioning splitting assets before filing for divorce. This is gold. She's planning a life with him while still legally married to you. That's not just adultery, it's premeditated fraud." I clenched my jaw. "So what does that mean for me?" My lawyer's smile widened. "It means she's about to get a very rude awakening. Over the next few weeks, I played my role perfectly. I pretended to be defeated, as if her threats had worked. She carried on as if she had already won. Coming home late. Ignoring me completely. Probably convinced I was just waiting for the inevitable. But I had already set my plan in motion. I hired a private investigator, just to seal the deal. A few days later, he handed me a full report, pictures of her and Daniel together, time-stamped and undeniable. She had no idea that every move she made was now a nail in her own coffin. Then came the final piece. She thought she had control. That she'd walk away with everything, leaving me with nothing. But the moment I officially filed for divorce, with adultery listed as the reason, she lost all leverage. My lawyer ensured that every piece of evidence was presented in a way that left no doubt. Not only would she get nothing, but she'd also be liable for legal fees. The house? Mine. The assets? Protected. Her future with Daniel? Shattered. And the best part? She had no idea what was coming. I just had to wait for the right moment to drop the hammer. The day had arrived. I sat at the kitchen table, the divorce papers resting in front of me, my fingers tapping lightly on the wooden surface. The air was thick with anticipation. I could feel it in my bones, the calm before the storm. She had no idea what was coming. That morning, she went about her usual routine, acting as if everything was normal. She gave me a brief, distracted good morning and went straight to the bathroom. The same indifference she had shown for weeks. It was almost like she couldn't be bothered to even pretend to care anymore. I had spent the last few days preparing for this moment, making sure everything was in place, double-checking the evidence, and waiting for the right opportunity. Now, as I watched her get ready for work, a sense of finality washed over me. This was it. She walked into the living room later, dressed for the day, and I could feel my pulse quicken. I stood up slowly, the papers in my hands. She glanced at me but didn't seem to notice anything unusual. "You need to sit down," I said, my voice steady, but cold. Her brow furrowed. "What's going on? Why do you look so serious?" I held out the envelope. "These are the divorce papers." Her eyes narrowed, disbelief flashing across her face. "What? No way. You're kidding, right?" I shook my head. "Not kidding. I've already filed." She stared at me for a moment, as if waiting for me to crack a smile, waiting for me to laugh it off like it was some sick joke. But there was no smile. No joke. I could see her heart racing now as reality sank in. "You can't do this." I stepped closer, holding the papers in front of her. "I've already done it." She snatched the papers from my hands and tore them open. Her eyes scanned the document quickly, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to disbelief. And then it hit her. She wouldn't get a single penny. She wouldn't get the house. She wouldn't get the savings. She wouldn't get anything. All of her plans, everything she had schemed, were shattered in an instant. Her voice wavered, but she tried to hold on to her composure. "This isn't fair. You can't take everything from me. I'll fight you in court. I raised my hand to silence her. "You already lost." Her face twisted in anger. "You don't know what you're doing. You think you're going to walk away from this with everything? You'll regret it, I swear." I could see the panic in her eyes, the reality of what she had done starting to settle in. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was yet to come. It only took a few minutes before my phone buzzed, breaking the tension in the room. It was a text from the private investigator. "I've got confirmation. Daniel knows about the divorce." I couldn't help but smile darkly as I showed her the message. She froze. "What do you mean, Daniel knows?" I didn't say anything. I just handed her my phone, showing her a message from Daniel that read, "I heard about the divorce. I'm sorry, but I can't be part of this mess. You need to figure things out on your own. Good luck." Her face drained of color, her mouth hanging open. He He left me?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. I nodded slowly. "He figured out you're not worth it. No one wants a woman who betrays her husband for a quick fling. You're on your own now." The weight of her realization crashed down on her, and for the first time in a long time, I saw her vulnerability. She had expected Daniel to swoop in and be her knight in shining armor once she had destroyed our marriage. But instead, he had abandoned her. He had seen her for what she was. She sank down into a chair, her face crumpling as she covered her face with her hands. "I can't believe this. How could you do this to me?" I took a step back, letting her process the betrayal, the very thing she had caused me to feel so many times over. "You did this to yourself," I said quietly. "You thought you could ruin my life and walk away with everything. But now you get to face the consequences." She looked up at me, her eyes red and desperate. "Please. You can't do this. You can't take everything from me. I'll fight you. I'll make sure you never see a dime." But I already knew the truth. She could fight all she wanted, but I had the evidence. She had no leverage, no way to turn this around. And deep down, she knew it too. Her future, the life she had imagined with Daniel, was already slipping through her fingers. She had thought she could have it all, our marriage, her lover, and the house. But in the end, karma had delivered the perfect justice. The days following the divorce were like a whirlwind, and watching her fall from grace was like witnessing a slow-motion train wreck. At first, she didn't know how to handle it. The confident, smug woman who once walked through the house as if she owned it, who thought she could take everything and walk away unscathed, was now a shadow of herself. She tried to fight back. She hired lawyers to challenge the settlement, attempted to turn friends and family against me, and even tried to paint herself as the victim. But every move she made only dug her deeper into a hole. The evidence was irrefutable, and no amount of manipulation could change that. The first blow came when the house was officially put up for sale. We had bought it together, built a life in it, and she had assumed it would be hers once the divorce was finalized. But when the settlement went through, the house became mine. She didn't take it well. I still remember the night she came over to grab her things. Her eyes were filled with anger, disbelief, and bitterness. She stormed into the house, her footsteps echoing through the empty rooms, and I watched her pack her clothes with an almost frantic energy. "Where will I even go?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and desperation. I didn't answer her. I didn't have to. The house was gone. But it wasn't just the house. Her financial stability, her plans for a life with Daniel, came crashing down too. Without the house, without the assets, and without a husband to rely on, she found herself scrambling. The few friends she had left abandoned her, seeing her for who she truly was. The gossip spread like wildfire. She had been so careful, so calculated in her deception, but now the truth was out. Her reputation was in tatters. I couldn't help but notice the social media posts from her former friends, some of them even mocking her for what had happened. The woman who had once flaunted her perfect life, her perfect marriage, was now a cautionary tale. She had tried to reach out to them, to get support, but no one would answer. They all saw the truth: she had betrayed the one person who trusted her the most. And it wasn't just the people around her who were turning their backs. Daniel, the man she had risked everything for, had already moved on. He didn't even look back. I heard about it from a mutual acquaintance. Apparently, Daniel had found someone else, someone less complicated, someone who wasn't involved in a messy divorce. He was tired of her drama, tired of the lies. And with him gone, she was left alone. Alone with the wreckage of everything she had destroyed. The final blow came when the bank account that had once been shared between us was closed. Her access to the joint funds was revoked. She had never thought it would come to this. She had assumed she would keep the lifestyle, the security, and the comfort she had enjoyed while playing both sides. But now, she was penniless. It was one evening, about a month after the divorce, when she came to me again. She showed up at my door, her clothes less polished, her face tired and gaunt. The woman who had once been so confident, so self-assured, was now a shadow of herself. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I was wrong. Please, I need your help. I can't do this on my own." I stood in the doorway, watching her as she looked at me with desperate eyes. There was no trace of the woman who had once looked down on me, no trace of the woman who had plotted her escape. Now, she was just a broken person begging for mercy. But it was too late. I had nothing to say to her. I didn't have the desire to comfort her, to take pity on her, or to give her the forgiveness she so desperately wanted. The truth was, she had already burned every bridge. She had chosen her path, and now she had to face the consequences. "I can't help you," I said simply. "You did this to yourself." The words hung in the air between us, and for a brief moment, I saw the realization hit her. She wasn't going to get another chance. There was no going back. She stood there for a long moment, her face crumbling as tears welled in her eyes. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words never came. With nothing left to say, she turned and left. As I closed the door behind her, a sense of calm washed over me. Karma had done its work. It had stripped her of everything, her home, her reputation, her lover, her money. And in the end, she was left with nothing but the wreckage of the life she had tried so hard to destroy. I had come through the storm unscathed, stronger, and wiser. She, on the other hand, was left to pick up the pieces of a life she had thought she could tear apart with no consequences. But now, she was the one who had to face the consequences. And karma had delivered its perfect justice. The days after the divorce felt like a new beginning, like I had been given a second chance at life. I didn't know how long it would take to feel whole again, but the weight that had been crushing me for so long was finally lifted. I was free. For the first time in years, I was free of the constant betrayal, the lies, and the emotional toll of a marriage that had been built on deceit. The scars were still there, but the healing had begun. I didn't dwell on the past. Instead, I focused on moving forward, on rebuilding what I had lost and creating something better. I started with myself. I made time for the things that had always been pushed aside, working out, picking up old hobbies, reconnecting with friends I had neglected during the turbulent years of my marriage. I was reminded of who I was before I became tangled in the web of lies. I also realized that I had been holding on to too many things. My home had been a symbol of my past life, but now it felt like a fresh start. I redecorated, made it my own, and for the first time, it felt like my space. I wasn't living in the shadows of the woman who had once called it home. I took a few trips, things I'd always wanted to do but had put off for too long. I explored new cities, met new people, and embraced life with a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. I learned to enjoy my own company, to find peace in solitude, and to appreciate the little moments that had once seemed so insignificant. And as time went on, the pain began to fade. The anger and bitterness that had consumed me in the beginning slowly gave way to gratitude. Because in the end, I realized something important: I had been better off without her. Meanwhile, her life continued to unravel. At first, I couldn't help but watch from a distance, curious about how she was coping with the fallout of her actions. The social media posts, the quiet whispers among mutual acquaintances, it was clear she was struggling. The friends she had relied on for support had distanced themselves, and I could see the isolation creeping in. Without her comfortable life and her sugar daddy to fall back on, she had to face the consequences of her choices. The job she had once held with such pride was no longer secure, and the friends she had once called family were nowhere to be found. It wasn't just about losing the material things. It was the realization that she had burned every bridge. She tried to contact me a few more times, sent a few desperate texts, even reached out through mutual friends. But I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My life was moving in the right direction, and I had no time for her. Eventually, I heard from some of our old acquaintances. They told me stories of how she was sinking further into despair. I knew she was probably sitting at home, thinking of ways to repair the damage, but deep down, I knew that wouldn't happen. You can't undo the harm you've done to someone who trusted you with everything. And I couldn't help but feel a certain satisfaction. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I knew she had brought this upon herself. She had chosen a path of selfishness, of betrayal, and now she was reaping what she had sown. But my true sense of revenge didn't come from seeing her suffer. It came from watching myself heal and rebuild. The true reward was in moving forward. I met someone new, a woman who showed me what love and respect truly meant. It wasn't the whirlwind romance that I'd once thought was my idea of happiness, but something deeper, more meaningful. She was kind, understanding, and patient. She didn't play games or make empty promises. She knew what trust and loyalty meant, and she brought out the best in me. I could see how much I had changed, how much stronger I had become. I was no longer the man who had allowed myself to be manipulated and betrayed. I had learned my worth, and I had learned that true happiness came from within, not from the approval or validation of others. Karma had done its job. I didn't have to lift a finger. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even, but about letting life unfold naturally. I didn't need to destroy her. I didn't need to make her suffer the way she had made me suffer. Life had a way of bringing people what they deserved, and in her case, it was a bitter lesson she would never forget. As for me, I had everything I needed. I was no longer a victim of her deceit. I had become the architect of my own happiness. And in the end, I realized that the best revenge was simply moving on, building a better life, and never looking back.